Well, pretty soon the old man was up and around again, and then he went for Judge Thatcher in the courts to make him give up that money. And he went for me too, for not stopping school. He catched me a couple of times and thrashed me, but I went to school just the same and dodged him or outrun him most of the time. I didn't want to go to school much before, but I reckoned I'd go now to spite Pap. That law trial was a slow business, appeared like they weren't ever going to get started on it, so every now and then I'd borrow $2 or $3 off the judge for him, to keep from getting a cowhiding. Every time he got money, he got drunk, and every time he got drunk, he raised Cain around town, and every time he raised Cain, he got jailed. He was just suited. This kind of thing was right in his line. He got to hanging around the widows too much, and so she told him at last that if he didn't quit coming around there, she would make trouble for him. Well, wasn't he mad? He said he would show who was Huck Finn's boss. So he watched out for me one day in the spring and catched me and took me up the river about 3 mile in a skiff and crossed over to the Illinois shore where it was woody and there weren't no houses but an old log hut in a place where the timber was so thick you couldn't find it if you didn't know where it was. He kept me with him all the time and I never got a chance to run off. We lived in that old cabin and he always locked the door and put the key under his head nights. He had a gun which he had stole, I reckon, and we fished and hunted, and that was what we lived on. Every little while he locked me in and went down to the store 3 miles to the ferry and traded fish and game for whiskey and fetched it home and got drunk and had a good time and licked me. The widow, she found out where I was by and she sent a man over to try to get hold of me. But Pap drove him off with the gun, and it wasn't long after that till I was used to being where I was and liked it, all but the cowhide part. It was kind of lazy and jolly, laying off comfortable all day, smoking and fishing, and no books nor study. 2 months or more run along, and my clothes got to be all rags and dirt, and I didn't see how I'd ever got to like it so well at the widow's, where you had to wash and eat on a plate and comb up and go to bed and get up regular, and be forever bothering over a book and have Miss Watson pecking at you all the time. I didn't want to go back no more. I had stopped cussing because the widow didn't like it, but now I took up to it again because Pap hadn't no objections. It was pretty good times up in the woods there, take it all around, but by and by Pap got too handy with his hickory and I couldn't stand it. I was all over welts. He got to going away so much too and locking me in. Once he locked me in and was gone 3 days, it was dreadful lonesome. I judged he had got drowned and I wasn't ever going to get out anymore. I was scared. I made up my mind I would fix up some way to leave there. I had tried to get out of that cabin many a time, but I couldn't find no way. There wasn't a window to it big enough for a dog to get through. I couldn't get up the chimney. It was too narrow. The door was thick old oak solid slabs. Pap was pretty careful not to leave a knife or anything in the cabin when he was away. I reckon I had hunted the place over as much as 100 times. Well, I was most all the time at it, because it was about the only way to put in the time. But this time I found something at last. I found an old rusty wood saw without any handle. It was laid in between a rafter and the clapboards of the roof. I greased it up and went to work. There was an old horse blanket nailed against the logs at the far end of the cabin behind a table to keep the wind from blowing through the chinks and putting the candle out. I got under the table and raised the blanket and went to work and saw a section of the big bottom log out, big enough to let me through. Well, it was a good long job, but I was getting toward the end of it when I heard Pap's gun in the woods. I got rid of the signs of my work and dropped the blanket and hid my saw, and pretty soon Pap came in. Pap was not in a good humor, so he was his natural self. He said he was down to town and everything was going wrong. His lawyer said he reckoned he would win his lawsuit and get the money if they ever got started on the trial. But then there was no ways to put it off a long time, and Judge Thatcher knowed how to do it. And he said people allowed there'd be another trial to get me away from him and give me to the widow for my guardian, and I guessed it would win this time. This shook me up considerable because I didn't want to go back to the widow's anymore and be so cramped up and civilized, as they called it. Then the old man got to cussing and cussed everything and everybody he could think of, and then cussed them all over again to make sure he hadn't skipped any. And after that he polished off with a kind of a general cuss all around, including a considerable parcel of people which he didn't know the names of, and so called them what's-his-name. And when he got to them, he went right along with his cussing. He said he would like to see the widow get me. He said he would watch out, and if they tried to come any such game on him, he knowed of a place 6 or 7 mile off to stow me in, where they might hunt till they dropped and they couldn't find me. That made me pretty uneasy again, but only for a minute. I reckon I wouldn't stay on hand till he got that chance. The old man made me go off to the skiff and fetch the things he had got. There was a 50-pound sack of cornmeal and a side of bacon, ammunition, and a 4-gallon jug of whiskey, and an old book and 2 newspapers for wadding, besides some tow. I towed it up below and went back and sat down on the bow of the skiff to rest. I thought it all over, and I reckoned I would walk off with the gun and some lines and take to the woods when I run away. I guessed I wouldn't stay in one place, but just tramp right across the country most nightly times, and hunt and fish to keep alive, and so get so far away that the old man nor the widow couldn't ever find me any more. I judged I would saw out and leave that night if Pap got drunk enough, and I reckoned he would. I got so full of it I didn't notice how long I was staying till the old man hollered and asked me whether I was asleep or drownded. I got the things all up to the cabin, and when it was dark, while I was cooking supper, the old man took a swig or two and got sort of warmed up and went to ripping again. He had been drunk over in town and laid in the gutter all night, and he was a sight to look at. A body would have thought he was at him. He was just all mud. Whenever his liquor begun to work, he most always went for the government. This time he says, "Call this a government? Why, just look at it and see what it's like. Here's the law is standing ready to take a man's son away from him, a man's own son, which he has had all the trouble and all the anxiety and all the expense of raising. Yes, just as that man has got that son raised at last and ready to go to work and begin to do something for him and give him a rest, the law up and goes for him. And they call that government. That ain't all, neither. The law backs the old Judge Thatcher up and helps him to keep me out of my property. Here's what the law does. The law takes a man worth $6,000 and upwards and jams him into an old trap of a cabin like this, and lets him go around in clothes that ain't fitting for a hog. They call that government. A man can't get his rights in a government like this. Sometimes I have a mighty notion to just leave the country for good and all. Yes, I told him so. I told old Thatcher's to his face. Lots of 'em heard me, and can tell what I said. Says I, for 2 cents I'd leave the blamed country and never come near it again. Them's the very words. I says, look at my hat, if you call it a hat, but the lid raises up and the rest of it goes down till it's below my chin. And then it ain't rightly a hat at all, but more like my head was shoved up through a jinta stovepipe. Look at it, says I, such a hat for me to wear, one of the wealthiest men in this town, if I could get my rights.